Mm, I can tell you more than that if you like, said the Gryphon. Do you know why it's called a whiting? I never thought about it, said Alice. Why? It does the boots and shoes, the Gryphon replied very solemnly. Alice was thoroughly puzzled. Does the boots and shoes? She repeated in a wondering tone. Why? What are your shoes done with? Said the Gryphon. I mean, what makes them so shiny? Alice looked down at them and considered a little before she gave her answer. Oh, they're done with blacking, I believe. Boots and shoes under the sea, the Gryphon went on in a deep voice, are done with whiting. Now you know. And what are they made of? Alice asked in a tone of great curiosity. Soles and eels, of course, the Gryphon replied rather impatiently. Any shrimp could tell you that. If I'd been the whiting, said Alice, whose thoughts were still running on the song, I'd have said to the porpoise, keep back, please. We don't want you with us.
Oh, they will reply, obligated to have him with them, the Mock Turtle said. No wise fish would go anywhere without a porpoise.
Wouldn't it really? Said Alice in a tone of great surprise.
Of course not,
said the Mock Turtle.
Why, if a fish came to me and told me he was going on a journey, I would say, with what purpose?
Don't you mean purpose? Said Alice.
I mean what I say,
the Mock Turtle replied in an offended tone. And the Gryphon added, Come, let us hear some of your adventures. I could tell you my adventures, beginning from this morning, said Alice a little timidly, but it's no use going back to yesterday, because I was a different person then.
Explain all that, said the Mock Turtle.
No, adventures first, said the Gryphon in an impatient tone. Explanations take such a dreadful time. So Alice began telling them her adventures from the time when she first saw the White Rabbit. She was a little nervous about it at first, just at first. The two creatures got so close to her on each side and opened their eyes and mouths so very wide. But she gained courage as she went on. Her listeners were perfectly quiet till she got to the part about repeating, "You are old, Father William," to the caterpillar, and the words were coming different. And then the Mock Turtle drew a long breath and said,
Oh, that's very curious.
It's all about as curious as it can be, said the Gryphon.
It all came different,
the Mock Turtle repeated thoughtfully.
I should like to hear her try and repeat something now. Tell her to begin.
He looked at the Gryphon as if he thought he had some kind of authority over Alice. Stand up and repeat, "'Tis the voice of the sluggard," said the Gryphon. Now how the creatures order one about and make one repeat lessons, thought Alice. I might as well be at school at once. However, she got up and began to repeat it, but her head was full of all the lobster quadrille that she hardly knew what she was saying, and the words came very queer indeed. Ahem, 'Tis the voice of the lobster, I heard him declare, You have baked me too brown, I must sugar my hair. As a duck with its eyelids, so he with his nose trims his belt and his buttons and turns out his toes. When the sands are all dry, he is gay as a lark, and will talk in contemptuous tones of the shark. But when the tide rises and sharks are around, his voice has a timid and tremulous sound.
That's different from what I used to say when I was a child, said the Gryphon.
Well, I never heard it before,
said the Mock Turtle.
It sounds uncommon nonsense.
Alice said nothing. She had sat down with her face in her hands, wondering if anything would ever happen in a natural way again.
I should like to have it explained, said the Mock Turtle.
She can't explain it, said the Gryphon hastily. Go on with the next verse.
But what about the toes?
The Mock Turtle persisted.
How could he turn them out with his nose, you know?
It's the first position in dancing, Alice said, but she was dreadfully puzzled by the whole thing and longed to change the subject.
Go on with the next verse,
the Gryphon repeated.
It begins, I passed by his garden.
Alice did not dare to disobey, though she felt sure if it would all come wrong, and she went on in a trembling voice. I passed by his garden and marked with one eye how the owl and the panther were sharing a pie. The panther took pie crust and gravy and meat, while the owl had the dish as its share of the treat. When the pie was all finished, the owl, as a boon, was kindly permitted to pocket the spoon, while the panther received knife and fork with a growl, and concluded the banquet by,
What is the use of repeating all that stuff?
The Mock Turtle interrupted.
If you don't explain it as you go on, it's all by far the most confusing thing I ever heard.
Yes, I think you better leave off,
said the Gryphon, and Alice was only too glad to do so.
Shall we try another figure of the lobster quadrille? Yes?
The Gryphon went on.
Or would you like Mock Turtle to sing you another song?
Oh, a song, please, if the Mock Turtle would be so kind, Alice replied so eagerly that the Gryphon said in a rather offended tone,
Yeah. No accounting for tastes. Sing her. Turtle soup. Will you, old fellow?
The Mock Turtle sighed deeply and began, in a voice choked with sobs, to sing this. Beautiful soup, so rich and green, waiting in a hot tureen. Who for such dainties would not stoop? Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, who cares for fish, game, or any other dish? Who would not give all else for 2 pennyworth, only of beautiful soup?
pennyworth only of beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup.
Chorus again!
cried the Gryphon, and the Mock Turtle had just begun to repeat it when a cry of
"The trial's beginning!"
was heard in the distance.
Come on!
cried the Gryphon, and taking Alice by the hand, it hurried off without waiting for the end of the song. What trial is it? Alice panted as she ran, but the Gryphon only answered,
Come on!
and ran faster, while more and more faintly came, carried on the breeze that followed them, the melancholy words of
Soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup.
Chapter 11. Who Stole the Tarts? The King and Queen of Hearts were seated on their throne when they arrived, with a great crowd assembled about them, all sorts of little birds and beasts, as well as the whole pack of cards. The knave was standing before them in chains, with a soldier on each side to guard him. And near the king was the White Rabbit, with a trumpet in one hand and a scroll of parchment in the other. In the very middle of the court was a table, with a large dish of tarts upon it. They looked so good, and it made Alice quite hungry to look at them. I wish they'd get the trial done, she thought, and hand around the refreshments. But there seemed to be no chance of this, so she began looking at everything about her to pass away the time. Alice had never been in a court of justice before, but she had read about them in books, and she was quite pleased to find that she knew the name of nearly everything there. Okay, that's the judge, she said to herself, because of his great wig. The judge, by the way, was the king, and he wore his crown over the wig. It did not look at all comfortable, and it was certainly not becoming. And that's the jury box, thought Alice, and those 12 creatures. She was obligated to say creatures, you see, because some of them were animals and some were birds. I suppose they are the jurors. She said this last word 2 or 3 times over to herself, being rather proud of it, for she thought, and rightly too, that very few little girls of her age knew the meaning of it at all. However, jurymen would have done it just as well. The 12 jurors were all writing very busily on slates. What are they doing? Alice whispered to the Gryphon. They can't have anything to put down yet because the trial's begun. Before the trial's begun.
They are putting down their names,
the Gryphon whispered in a reply,
for fear they might forget them before the end of the trial.
Stupid things, Alice began in a loud, indignant voice, but she stopped herself hastily, for the White Rabbit called out, Silence in the court! And the king put on his spectacles and looked anxiously round to make out who was talking. Alice could see, as well as if she were looking over their shoulders, that all the jurors were writing down stupid things on their slates, and she could even make out that one of them didn't know how to spell stupid. and that he had to ask his neighbour to tell him. A nice muddle their slates will be in before the trial's over, thought Alice. One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. Oh, this, of course, Alice could not stand, and she went round the court and got behind him, and very soon found an opportunity of taking it away. She did it so quickly that the poor juror, it was Bill the lizard, could not make out at all what had become of it. So after hunting all about for it, he was obligated to write with one finger for the rest of the day, and this was of very little use, as it had left no mark on the slate.
"Herald, read the accusation,"
said the king. On this, the White Rabbit blew 3 blasts of the trumpet, and then unrolled the parchment scroll and read as follows.
Yes, the Queen of Hearts had made some tarts, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts and took them quite away.
"Consider your verdict,"
the king said to the jury.
No, not yet.
The rabbit hastily interrupted.
There's a great deal to come before that, sire.
"Call the first witness,"
said the king, and the White Rabbit blew 3 blasts on the trumpet and called out,
"The first witness."
The first witness was the Hatter. He came in with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other.
"Oh, I beg your pardon, your majesty,"
he began,
"for bringing these in, but I haven't quite finished my tea, and then when I was sent for—" "You ought to have finished," said the king. "When did you begin?"
The Hatter looked at the March Hare, who followed him into the court, arm in arm with the Dormouse.
"On the 14th of March, I think it was,"
he said.
15th,
said the March Hare.
16th,
said the Dormouse.
"Write that down,"
said the king. The king said to the jury, and the jury eagerly wrote down all those 3 dates on their slates, and then added them up and reduced the answer to shillings and pence.
"Take off your hat,"
the king said to the Hatter.
"Oh, it isn't mine,"
said the Hatter.
"Stolen!"
the king exclaimed, turning to the jury, who instantly made a memorandum of the fact.
"Oh no, I keep the cell,"
the Hatter added as an explanation.
I've none of my own. I'm a Hatter."
Here the queen put on her spectacles and began staring hard at the Hatter, who turned pale and fidgeted.
"Give your evidence," said the king, "and don't be nervous. I'll have you executed on the spot."
This did not seem to encourage the witness at all. He kept shifting from one foot to the other, looking uneasily at the queen, and in his confusion he bit a large piece out of his teacup instead of the bread and butter. Just at this moment, Alice felt a very curious sensation, which puzzled her a good deal until she made out what it was. She was beginning to grow larger again, and she thought at first that she would get up and leave the court, but on second thought she decided to remain where she was as long as there was room for her.
"I wish you wouldn't squeeze so,"
said the Dormouse, who was sitting next to her.
"I can hardly breathe."
I can't help it," said Alice very meekly. "I'm growing."
"You have no right to grow here,"
said the Dormouse. Don't talk nonsense," said Alice more boldly. You know you're growing too."
"Yes, but I grow at a reasonable pace,"
said the Dormouse.
"Not in that ridiculous fashion."
and he got up very sulkily and crossed over to the other side of the court. At this time the Queen had never left off staring at the Hatter, and just as the Dormouse crossed the court, she said to one of the officers of the court,
"Bring me the list of the singers in the last concert."
On which the wretched Hatter trembled so that he shook off both his shoes.
"Give your evidence,"
the King repeated angrily,
"or I'll have you executed, whether you're nervous or not."
"Oh, I'm a poor man, your Majesty," the Hatter began in a trembling voice. "I haven't begun my tea. Not about a week or so. And what with their bread and butter getting so thin, and the twinkling of the tea."
"The twinkling of what?"
said the King. It began with the tea," the Hatter replied.
"Of course twinkling begins with a T,"
said the King sharply.
"Do you take me for a dunce? Go on."
I'm a poor man," said the Hatter. The Hatter went on, "and most things twinkle after that. Only the March Hare said—"
"No, I didn't,"
the March Hare interrupted in a great hurry. "You did," said the Hatter.
"I deny it,"
said the March Hare said.
"He denies it,"
said the King.
"Leave the poor that."
At any rate, the Dormouse said," the Hatter went on, looking anxiously around to see if he would deny it too, but the Dormouse denied nothing, being fast asleep. "After that," continued the Hatter, "I cut some more bread and butter."
"Excuse me, what did the Dormouse say?"
one of the jurors asked. "That I can't remember."
"You must remember,"
remarked the King,
or I'll have you executed."
The miserable Hatter dropped his teacup and the bread and butter and went down on one knee. "I'm just a poor man, your Majesty," he began.
"You're a very poor speaker,"
said the King. Here one of the guinea pigs cheered and was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court. At this, as that is a rather hard word, I will explain to you how it was done. They had a large canvas bag, which tied up at the mouth with strings. Into this they slipped the guinea pig head first and then sat on it. I'm glad I've seen that done, thought Alice. I've so often read it in the newspapers at the end of the trials. There was some attempt at applause there which was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court, and I never understood what it meant till now.
"If that's all you know about it, you may stand down," continued the King.
"I can go no lower," said the Hatter. "I'm on the floor as it is."
"Then you may sit down," the King replied.
And here the other guinea pig cheered and was suppressed. "Come, that finishes the guinea pigs," thought Alice. "Now we should get on better." "I'd rather finish my tea," said the Hatter, with an anxious look at the Queen, who was reading the list of singers.
"You may go,"
said the King, and the Hatter hurried left the court without even waiting to put his shoes on. And just take his head off outside," the Queen added it to one of the officers, but the Hatter was out of sight before the officer could get to the door.
"Call the next witness,"
said the King. The next witness was the Duchess's cook. She carried the pepper box in her hand, and Alice guessed who it was, even before she got into the court, by the By the way, the people near the door began sneezing at once.
"Give your evidence,"
said the king.
"Shan't,"
said the cook. The king looked anxiously at the White Rabbit, who said in a low voice,
Your Majesty must cross-examine this witness."
"Well, if I must, I must,"
said the king, with a melancholy air, and after folding his arms and frowning at the cook till his eyes were nearly out of sight, he said in a deep voice,
"What are tarts made of?"
"Pepper, mostly," said the cook.
"Treacle," said a sleepy voice behind her.
"Collar the dormouse!"
The queen shrieked out.
"Behead the dormouse! Turn the dormouse out of court! Suppress him! Pinch him! Cut off his whiskers!"
And for some minutes the whole court was in confusion, getting the dormouse turned out. And by the time they had settled down again, the cook had disappeared.
"Well, never mind,"
said the king, with an air of great relief.
"Call the next witness."
And he added in an undertone to the queen,
"Really, my dear, you must cross-examine the next witness. It quite makes my forehead ache."
Alice watched the White Rabbit as he fumbled over the list, feeling very curious to see what the next witness would be like.
"Yes, for they haven't
got much evidence yet," she said to herself. Imagine her surprise when the White Rabbit read out at the top of his shrill little voice the name
Alice."